Last time, we talked about necessity to mind peculiar features of listeners or readers when communicating with them in any form, whether oral or written. And we said that not every audience may take in whatever you tell. And I promised to tell you about the next problem that's clear to translators but can be obscure to the uninitiated. My mother tongue, which is Russian, doesn't have a word for twins. How come? Easy. Russians have two words. One of them is for identical twins, the other one for non-identical twins. When they say those words, they don't need to add another word, like identical. And that's a problem for a Russian translator working with an English text. What kind of twins were the brothers, identical or not? As for the constellation of the twins, Russians decided they are identical, which sounds logical, but if they have to talk about real people and don't have a clue, they'll have to think it up and possibly be mistaken. That's unavoidable when translating from any language to any other. An opposite example. The Russian language has a word for hand and arm together. They see them as one limb. And they have a word for foot and leg together. They also see them as one limb. So when an English translator working with a Russian text reads that somebody was wounded in the part of body, the Russian word for which is ruka, he has to decide if that was a hand or an arm. What if he doesn't know for sure? If it isn't stated? If there is no more information, no clue, what will he have to do? He will have to think it all up and be mistaken with 50% odds. If he opts for hand while the wound was here, that will surely be a mistake, but there is no way to guess, and there are lots of such cases. Just think, the Russian language uses absolutely the same words for fingers, thumbs, and toes. When we read an ancient Hebrew text, we should know that a lot of words used there don't have good counterparts in the English language, and not English alone. That's why translators have to look for what fits approximately. If a reader who reads only translation will take every translated word as the ultimate truth, the truth for him will be exactly what stands in the translation and nothing else. Moreover, it turns out that the problem with ancient Hebrew is even graver. The thing is, the reason why ancient Hebrew is ancient is that it ceased being spoken as early as 2,500 years ago. The Bible tells us about the deportation of Israelites to Babylon in the days of King Nebuchadnezzar in the 6th century BC. So after they got there, they ended up adopting the local language, the lingua franca of those days. That language was Aramaic. It sounds like Hebrew, but it's different. I guess it's something like English and Scots, maybe like English and Dutch. It has a different grammar. It has similar words, but not all of them are alike. And even the similar words sound and spell differently. As for ancient Hebrew, it really became ancient. It lingered on as the language of the Bible, the Holy Scriptures. It was used and still is in religious contexts. It was used for reading and writing, but only in literary works on theology and for poetry. It wasn't a vernacular. That's why, as early as in the days of Jesus Christ, Jews had to study that language on purpose, like modern English people have to study, say, Geoffrey Chaucer's English. Not everyone understood it freely. And for that reason, rather soon, in the historical perspective, it turned out that some words which came up rarely in the sacred text, just twice or even once, weren't quite clear anymore. And as early as in the days of Jesus Christ, the Jewish sages had trouble with a lot of places in scriptures that we are perplexed at. They started arguing how to read this, what it means. Even they didn't have a real understanding. If so, the readers of the modern English translations of any kind can't get it all quite clear. Now, let's have a look at a curious thing. This is the text of the initial 5 verses of the Bible in the original language. Yes, I can read it. I have learned how to read that in order to deal with it. Obviously, I don't know every word of the ancient Hebrew language, because even the Jews in the days of Jesus didn't. But I can read this and look up in a reference book to find out what lies behind an obscure word. Anyway, you can see here, apart from the letters, various dots and dashes. Under the letters, over the letters, what's that? Those are vowels. Yes, ancient Hebrew had no vowel letters. Now, if you delete vowel letters from an English text, you'll get loads of exciting things. Say, how do you make it out what city stands for? Is it cut or cat? Or maybe cot? Or perhaps cute? Well, often we can make it out from the context, but it won't always lead to an unequivocal understanding. There are a great lot of such words. Just try deleting all the vowels from an English text and see what you get if you don't know the meaning for sure. Ambiguities are quite possible. A good example can be this text from Genesis 29 verses 10 and 11. If you delete all the signs for vowels, dots and dashes, the top and bottom lines start with absolutely the same set of letters. But in the line at the top, you have to read Vayashk, while at the bottom it's Vayishak, and by no means the other way around. The thing is, the first line says that Jacob gave water to Laban's sheep, and the second one reads that he kissed Rachel. The words with identical letters are gave water and kissed. If you swap them, what you get is he gave water to Rachel and kissed the sheep. That isn't quite logical. But he could have given water to Rachel as well. So you had to remember that what he did in the second line was he yishak, that is, kissed Rachel, not yashk, that is, gave her water. The letters didn't give any clue to that. To say the truth, there is another clue. The prepositions that follow the verbs make it clear. But you need to know that secret too. And such clues aren't always there. So ancient Hebrew didn't make use of vowel letters. And that became the reason for the second problem that came up as soon as they started to forget the language. They began forgetting meanings of rare words and even how to pronounce the words whose meanings they knew exactly. That's why, when in the 20th century the Hebrew language was revivificated and made colloquial in the land of Israel, they had to choose between options. Because the Jews who had been living in the territory of the Russian Empire and Germany were reading the Bible in quite a different way from how it was read by the Jews who had been living in Africa or Palestine. The pronouncing manners weren't alike at all. Say, for example, what kind of word is Shabbos? You can hear the word Shabbos if you enter any synagogue in Moscow or St. Petersburg on a Friday evening. That's Sabbath. Well, what about Shabbat? Yeah, Shabbat, sure. And Shabbos? Shabbos too. Shabbos is for the European Jews, Ashkenazis, and Shabbat for the Israeli Jews. That's the Sephardic dialect. Pronunciation differs drastically. That has all been accumulated in 2,500 years. But as early as 2,000 years ago, there already was this problem. What's the right way to say some letters? And which vowels to put with them? Why, that changes the meaning. That's why, in about the 8th century, Jewish sages of those days realized the problem. They are forgetting how to read the text correctly. They gathered a committee and developed what is called nekudot, those dots and dashes going with letters as prompts for pronouncing vowels. But it turned out that Jews in various areas of the then diaspora were already reading differently. And for that reason, they had to make choices, which options to eliminate, which to accept. We'll fix some down and screen off the other ones. But why these? Well, because we find them correct. We have examined the options and decided these ones will be truer. Unless we know that, it seems to us that the biblical text has always been the same, always clear and unquestionable, but it hasn't. Sad but true. When European translators took up translating that all into the modern languages, which are more or less understandable to us, the Jewish milieu had already worked out a reading tradition. But it had been formed this way by selecting and screening out the options they had. That's why it's quite a normal thing for Hebrew sages to take and discard all those vowel marks and say, let's try reading this word with different vowels and see what we come up with. Let's try seeing what we get. You will assume that this word didn't used to be voweled originally the way we have it in our standard version. Why, the nekudot are a later invention, and there may have been some other vowels, and that would change the meaning. This problem starts right from the second word of the book of Genesis, bara. Rashi, who was a very authoritative medieval Jewish commentator, suggested reading it as bro. That would change a nuance important for theology. We aren't going into that now. There is a drastic difference in how various translations render Genesis 49:21. New International Version reads, Naphtali is a doe set free that bears beautiful fawns. And there comes the footnote, or he utters beautiful words. In the footnote to Good News Translation, you find the following. Naphtali is a spreading tree that puts out lovely branches. And this last version is actually based on Septuagint, the ancient translation into Greek furnished in Egypt as long ago as in the 3rd century BC. How can there be such a difference? In fact, all the translators worked with the same text. This is what it looks like in the traditional Hebrew Bible. The problem is which vowels you use in certain words. If you forget about the vowel signs here, you can't be sure about meanings. The second word on the right could be ayala, then it is a doe, or elah, then it is a terebinth tree. Hebrew reads from right to left, so that's the second word in the sentence. The last but one word in the sentence, which is the second word on the left, followed by something like a dash at the top, could be imrei, then it is words or sayings, or amirei, then it's top branches. Of course, if you choose to read Elah, then you logically come to Amirei, branches. But the problem is that Jews themselves opted for Ayala, a doe, and for Imrei, verbs. No one knows why. And it is clearly a metaphor, so you don't have a clue. You can't understand what lies under a doe uttering beautiful words or a terebinth tree putting out lovely branches. Metaphors can be very complicated. We'll have a chance to talk about that. You can have any literal meanings of words there. Obscurity and even absurdity of a metaphor only add to its sophistication and beauty. And here comes up another option. Read Imrei, but consider it an Aramaic word, not a Hebrew one, for reason of being recorded later in Babylon. And then you come to beautiful forms that a doe can surely have. But the exact meaning of this metaphor still evades you. Even if you know for sure how to pronounce the words written in the original, you face the next problem: how to understand them correctly. The point is that every language has words with more than one meaning. And here we find a new series of most curious surprises. We'll look into them in our next talks.